Once upon a time, a girl named Kristen received two book boxes from the most famous book box companies in the whole entire world. And both of them in the same month decided that they were going to send books about Grimm fairy tales. And now Kristen, being who she is, could not resist setting up a little bit of a fairy tale book box battle. And she can't just put two books in one video for Licator. So we're going to be doing a fairy tale battle. We've got Red Riding Hood retelling and a Hansel and Gretel retelling. And in our second battle of the books, we've got two fairy tale characters gone con man and con woman. Welcome to Licator, by the way, where apparently just matching outfits isn't enough for me anymore. I've gone full Halloween up until Christmas. Let me have my moment. This is so much fun. The first book we'll be talking about today is indeed inspired by Little Red Riding Hood. I basically picked this book up the instant I finished the haul in which I unpacked it. I was so excited to read this. This edition, first of all, is absolutely stunning. So let me tell you what this one is all about. First of all, this is YA. I do want to say that. This is Forest Grimm by Catherine Purdy, who, by the way, did The Bone Crier's Moon. She did that series, which I haven't read yet, but I sure as heck am going to read now. This is about a really, really interesting village set near a rather interesting Grimm forest. But what makes this village very, very special is that they have this amazing book called Sorts Fortunae. Everyone in the village gets to make one wish when they come of age in this book. You whisper it into the book. On that page, the book will tell you what you have to do to ensure your wish comes true. But if you tell anyone what that book told you, your wish will fall to shreds. It's pretty intense. And if you make a second wish, good luck to you, man. Can't do it. So, someone breaks the cardinal rule and uses their wish to hurt someone. And now the forest is really pissed, and so they take their book back, and no one can go into the forest to get it. This is where our beautiful Clara comes in. The very first person who was lost to the forest was sadly her mother. One by one, villagers have been seeming possessed and walking into the forest and never being seen again. So charming Clara is helping her friend gather items to dye wool and linen and fabric and whatever. She realizes she has stepped a tiny bit past the forest barrier and she is safe. And it's because she is holding red rampion. She realizes anything dyed with this plant or anyone holding this plant can cross the barrier. Off Clara goes, and you know what? There's a boy who kind of sort of she maybe loves but can't love him because his fiance is stuck in the forest named Ella, and you know who decides to follow them carrying a handful of rampion? Her best friend Henny. So off these three geniuses go into a very, very dangerous forest with very little planning. And meanwhile, did I mention Clara has like scoliosis? So she's in pain this entire time. And through the forest they go to try and find the book because the one thing that can bring the book back and save everything is a selfless wish. And Clara is certain that she can do this because she's not made her wish yet. She knows she's got this. All she has to do is make it through the super dangerous forest, find the book, and get her mommy back. Did I mention there's a wolf? There's totally a wolf. All right, so my review on this book. First of all, it is very young YA. The writing reads quite simplistic, which I found somewhat disappointing. I really wanted some more vivid descriptions. However, I found that the sense of menace and ominous presence of the forest and just honestly, some of the things that they come across and things that happen to them are kind of really horrific and genuinely spooky and honestly really truly creep me out. We got the full Grimm experience. I mean, the OG Grimm experience. And that almost felt at odds to me with how young some of the writing was. You get the whole adventure feeling for sure. I want to show you the reverse dust jacket because this, once you get into the forest, really does capture the feeling that you get. It is ominous. The sense of danger is omnipresent. You're never bored. They're always meeting characters. There's always danger. Even when they're trying to sleep in the forest, they're tying themselves together because the forest moves and the forest will move them and separate them if it is given the chance. It is kind of intense. Once they get in that forest, you're just going the whole time. You're always coming across someone. There's always something happening. They're always following someone. There's always a clue to be had. The absolute best thing this book did was capturing the fairy tale feeling. And it did this in a way that was just so magical. I am one of those superstitious people. I really, really, truly am. I knock on wood when something goes wrong and I feel like I've jinxed something. And did you know that comes from like, I think the Celtic, and you're doing that to like say, hey, spirit in a tree originally, please come and protect me because I've done something stupid. I love that. And they can't say their wishes out loud or they won't come true. All of those wonderful folktale things are there. Take my luck, throwing salt over your shoulder. Every single time we see them, I feel like we're getting another little piece of folklore and town superstition. And I thought that was so fantastic. And in fact, in the back of the book, they actually have little sections concerning love and marriage, concerning everything else that are the town superstitions and lore, which I thought was just fantastic when I found at the end. And you don't see all of them throughout the book. That would be completely overwhelming, but you do see a lot of them. The other thing that was so incredible was how the other fairy tales were brought in. I did mention Red Rampion. Red Rampion being a protector is so interesting because in the original story of Rapunzel, the reason the witch takes Rapunzel is because her mother, when she was pregnant with Rapunzel, all she craves is this plant called Rampion. And the only place that the mother-to-be's husband could find it was in the witch's garden. And when he stole it, she said, well, kid's life is forfeit. Rapunzel's now mine. And to start off that way, I knew we were going to have all of these amazing references cross throughout, and we did. The way the stories were twisted, though, you could tell the Forest Grimm twisted them itself, and that was so magical. Ella we see almost immediately in the book, so I don't feel like that's a spoiler. She was originally meant to marry Axel, and she becomes Cinderella because right before she runs into the forest, she was seen by the fireplace and smeared her wedding dress with cinders and ran into the forest covered with cinders, so her nickname was Cinderella. Just wonderful details like that made this feel so full of all the fairy tale magic that I wanted. So this was wonderful in so many ways. My complaints, however, the characters did lack development to a certain extent. The relationship between her and Axel, you know from the beginning that these two traveling together, you're probably going to see them fall in love. There wasn't enough development. And there wasn't enough character development in general. We see her in a situation at one point where I was really like crying, and she was fine afterwards, and for the rest of the book she did not have a trauma response to it at all, and it felt really inauthentic to me. I was just like, why are you fine? And then at the end we do see that there's going to be a sequel. I'm glad there's going to be a sequel. I'm excited to read more, but to make it happen, it felt like the book broke a previous rule that it had created. I think it would have been better as a standalone and stronger as a standalone, even though I'm excited to get a second book. And the writing was just also a little too YA for me. It did achieve spooking the crap out of me, but I wish that it had just been a tiny bit more elevated. Other than that, I do think this was an incredible read. While I was reading it, I thought for sure it was going to be a 5-star until I analyzed it at the end. So that's how much fun I had reading it. It's a very strong 4 stars. I loved it. I'm so glad I own it. It's maybe one of my favorite editions that I've gotten recently. So, loved it. After the Forest by Cal Woods. This takes place 20 years after Hansel and Gretel, or as they're called in this book, Hans and Greta, have escaped the witch. Both of them are pretty freaking traumatized. Their stepmother and their father have both since passed. No one's doing particularly great. A war has kind of just ended, and part of it was like religiously motivated between Protestants and Catholics, and multiple countries were involved, so everyone's like kind of war poor. Soldiers are returning, people are slightly traumatized, the coffers are kind of bare after paying for a war, fields were razed, lives were lost. Hans and Greta in particular, of course, are still dealing with their trauma. Greta did something interesting. She made a choice. She stole the witch's book of spells from the witch's cottage, and she now has it and is using it to bake gingerbread, which is sort of kind of addictive, and really the best gingerbread in the whole wide world, to support her and her brother. And her brother, meanwhile, kind of has a drinking problem and a little bit of gambling problem, and really isn't doing particularly well. The bigger problem is that people of this time are kind of suspicious, okay? We're in like kind of a Scandinavian setting. This is not great for Greta in general. She's kind of strange. Their cottage is on the outskirts. They know that she had lived with a witch for a while. The whispers are getting worse. And there's also other things that are occurring. A strange man has shown up. There's people from elsewhere who are showing up. There's a sense of like darkness that has come and is coming from the forest. I am not sure how much more I can tell you. That is all that is in this description. I will go a little more into it in my critique, but this is a complicated book. There is one thing in books that I really can't handle, and that is animal cruelty and animal violence. And as we're going through this book, we're over 400 pages in, and there is on page very vivid, very gruesome, very violent, awful description of horrific animal cruelty. It did not need to be there. If Kelwoods really, really needed it to happen, she could have said that it happened off page and just left it at that. I get we need evil characters. We did not need to bear witness. It was too much. I couldn't handle it. I didn't expect it to be there. So when I read it, I was just shocked, and I've never read anything like that before in my life. And obviously I kind of stopped, but it was just too late. And I found it very upsetting. So normally when I find books that have warnings like that, I just don't read them. So I don't really know how to rate this book because I normally would not have read it if I had known that was in there. I can't give it 5 stars because that was shown on page and I just found it so horrific and I was so upset by it. Is that fair to the author? I don't know, but in my heart, that ruined my week. I just had to go cry in my dog's fur. I was not okay. However, that was my biggest criticism. The rest of the book was phenomenal. Let me try and talk about the rest of it, which was really, truly, to be fair, incredible. So the writing, for starters, it felt exactly like a fairy tale. And I don't want you to look at this artwork for 1 second and be fooled. It felt nothing like that. This was so dark and bleak. We have the aftermath of the war. We have people struggling to get by. We have this constant fear and accusation of witchcraft. What was so beautiful and amazing and interesting right from the start is you knew there were going to be more fairy tales woven into this, just like with the first book. There are so many moving pieces and parts, the political parts, the money parts, the witchcraft parts. It is so well done to have the Snow White fairy tale, to have the Hansel and Gretel fairy tale, everything coming together. And then there are so many different types of little magic. Some I think she made up completely on her own to explain different things, but to have everything come together the way it did, I have never seen Snow White done exactly that way. I certainly have never seen Hansel and Gretel done this way. It was original, phenomenal. This was a debut. I can't believe this was a debut, okay? The writing was, if that scene had not been in there, I would be 5 stars singing this book's praises, jumping up and down, telling you this is the most wonderful Scandinavian, brilliant. I am in love with this book. All I remember for the last over 100 pages, I think, I was holding this book and I was like, I'm gonna ruin this beautiful edition because my hands are sweating. My heart is pounding. I am so stressed reading the end of this book and things that I never even thought that were going to get answered or solved, things that I didn't even think to ask from the original fairy tale or from Greta's backstory came back and were explained. And it just made so much sense and it was so fantastic. And I was just like, thank you for tying every last little thing up with a bow. I don't know what to do with it because I was so upset by it. I did go online to see if other people were having a similar reaction. Everyone just says, just skip that chapter. You don't need it, which just proves my point that it was unnecessary, I suppose. Read it without it, and it's an incredible experience. In terms of Battle of the Books, I have a very hard time comparing a completely adult novel to a very young YA novel in the first place. This one did not offend me. This one was maybe better overall. I'm going to say it's a tie simply because there is no comparing these two. We've got 2 different fruits here completely. I'm very sorry to disappoint you in my first half of the Battle of Books. Do with my reviews what you will. I will say skip chapter 25. Next up, one sec. That's better, don't you think? Pretend it's still Halloween. I've always wanted to wear a crown. All right, so first we are going to be comparing Charming by Jade Linwood and The Flyer Lady by D.L. Soria. First up is Charming. The tagline is, he'll pick your pocket while he's stealing your heart. So this is the story of Prince Jean-Marc Charming Arundel, known to friends and enemies alike as Prince Charming. And he is super handsome. He is like peerless, the best swordsman. He can do it all. And he has this great little like sidekick who's sort of like basically a dad bringer for like Nathaniel and Enchanted. And the two of them together are honestly hilarious. I loved them. Instead of settling down with one princess, no. Prince Charming is kind of a fraud. He goes from kingdom to kingdom to kingdom. And he does this little task, ensnares, enchants, whatever, his little princess. And then, like, the day before he's going to marry them, he, like, steals half the treasury and runs off and then does it again. So this is basically the movie John Tucker Must Die. We open seeing him meeting the very poor, long slumbering Belle Lucia de Sogny. I thought for sure she was gonna be like Belle. No. She is apparently Sleeping Beauty, and we see him jumping in and like cutting down some brambles and like actually it's his sidekick who's doing it. And by the way, like we did not need his sidekick to be described as like always eating and really, really smelly. Like we just didn't need that. Other than that, his sidekick was great. And he gets there just as the curse is gonna end after 100 years. And he's just like standing there waiting because apparently the prophecy was that when Belle awoke, her true love would be waiting there. And so she wakes up and she sees him and she's like, oh, you must be my true love. And like, meanwhile, he didn't do crap. He didn't kiss her. He didn't do anything. He's just standing there waiting because he like knew the prophecy and was like, yep, okay, claiming my prize. And everyone's excited and like, oh, look at him. He's a prince. What's your name? Prince Charming. So everyone's like, great, wonderful. We'll arrange the wedding straight away. He's like, yeah, why wait? Like, let's do it. By the way, can I get a tour? Like, let's see what you got going on here. Let's see the whole castle. Where's the treasury? And then right for the wedding, off he absconds. And Belle is like freaking heartbroken. She's been asleep for the last 100 years and she's not that old. So she's kind of very childlike and innocent and she is just shredded. Okay. And it is really sad. Later on, we see her attending the wedding for someone else, and she happens to meet two other charming ladies, and they are Marie Blanche de Neige and sorceress Dr. Amelia Rapunzel. And it's funny, they also have these stories about this terrible guy who helped them out of a sticky situation. Actually, he kind of actually did crap for Rapunzel. Marie Blanche de Neige, Snow White, he sort of assisted, I suppose, with her situation as well, and also absconded right before he was meant to marry her. Rapunzel, she was just like knocked out and he just like assumed she was gonna be fine. He sort of left her in the lurch, but like mostly just stole like a lot of magical crap. They get together and much like in John Tucker Must Die, they had to plan to catch Prince Charming in the act and ensure that, well, they sort of want different things. Belle still just freaking wants to marry the guy and is absolutely certain that he had to leave for some unknown reason and they are true love's actual match. And the others are kind of more like, we want our stuff back. So that is the general story. Unfortunately, I will say that the absolute best part was the premise. The premise is genius. The premise is brilliant. Why has no one done this? I loved it so much. The idea was fantastic. The setup was terrific. And we open with Prince Charming and seeing in his head and seeing him with his sidekick. They were great. They were the funniest parts. They were hilarious. He was the most morally great character in the whole gosh darn world because at times he will do heroic things. He just doesn't want to get married. He doesn't want to, he's not in love. He's not going to fall in love in 3 days. Like, what is that crap? That's not his jam. The sidekick, Roland, was my favorite character. He had the best twist. He absolutely was genius. We didn't need all that like smelly, constantly eating stuff. I loved the way he did things. The two of them had the best banter. They were my favorite part. The princesses, I am shocked to say, bored the ever-living crap out of me. The twists on the fairy tales were also great. They were very original. I enjoyed them a lot. Sleeping Beauty, maybe not so much, but the others, yes. Very, very different. I loved the twist. They felt a little more modern. I enjoyed them so much. But these girls had so much potential. There was so much she could have done with them. Belle really didn't show a lot of development. She just kind of stayed stagnant for the most part. We saw a little bit of growth at the end. I was disappointed. We could have done so much with Dr. Rapunzel, an arcane witch. Oh, I was expecting so much more. So much more. And I was just bored to crap with Marie Snow White. Like, she was great with animals, but she was just like this, I got very little from her. She seemed very, very cold. But you know what killed it for me, and I'm shocked to say this, is the writing. I started this off on purpose, reading these very sarcastic, snappy little gotcha, ensnare you lines, right? The writing is very formal. It feels very fairy tale. And if Jadelyn would wanted to have her characters speak in that way to a certain extent and then add little like snarky lines but in slightly more formal ways, that would have been fine. That would have been really interesting. We could have had maybe even like a slightly Princess Bride kind of tone going on. But all of the writing was very formal to the point where it just pulled the book down. The tone was all wrong. It was heavy. It was so formal and was trying to feel like a fairy tale, which I understand. But when you're going to have a fractured fairy tale or something this irreverent, you need to have snark. You need to have humor. You need to have anything like that. I was expecting like Shrek, something along those lines. And we got none of that. It was not funny. It was not funny at all. There was no humor. And when you're reading a book with this kind of plot and it's not at all funny, everything just feels wrong and flat. I didn't understand it. It was a little bit of drudgery to get through this one. It was. So this was like 3 stars. I'm very sorry to say, I was hoping this would scratch my itch after reading Assistant to the Villain. This was worse. Next, Thief Lair Lady by D.L. Soraya. So the deal with this one is we have a Cinderella retelling, except Cinderella is full of crap. Cinderella has been raised by her stepmother and with her stepsisters, except they are all in on the con. Cinderella, well, she was treated terribly by her stepmother, but still were her stepsisters. They were all beaten into submission, and they were all trained to basically be the perfect women so they could eventually go into the courts and find their best matches, and their stepmother could gain all the power she wants and money and yada yada yada, you get the point. So they actually came up with the backstory that she was treated as a servant instead of on equal footing with her stepsisters. There's no pumpkin, there's no glass slippers, there's no fairy godmother, there's no mice that turned into horses. In fact, that's not even the story that they made up. The people made that up, which is hilarious. All she did was show up 3 nights in a row using luster. Luster is the magic that is in this book, and it's just this powder. And royals have all they want. It can like basically be used anything as makeup or used to influence people in larger amounts. If you know how to use it as magic, it can be infused into jewelry and you can like press it on people and use it. For the most part, you can kind of like see when it's being used. So you have to be really, really careful with it. And most people don't know how to use it very well, and they're not like skilled enough to make it worthwhile. And you can see it. So like you gotta be careful. But they found a way to enchant an entire room for 3 nights and make her seem like the most interesting, beautiful person in the room. And of course, the prince was included in that. She was by Lady Ashleen, and the prince's name is Prince Everett. So when the book finally opens, we learn all this sort of in retrospect. And she's hanging out with Everett. She's in the court, but there's sort of war looming. She's running out of magic. And there's this hostage prince from the country that they are sort of potentially going to war with who keeps catching her eye. And she keeps catching his. And they keep snarking at one another. Did we all know where this is going, right? So there is so much more going on in this book than I can possibly explain. But just know that Ashlyn is not just in the palace purely to get married and to marry her sisters off. She wants so much more for herself. She wants so much more for her country and for the country that's in trouble. She really wants to make the world a better place. And to watch her do all this, sometimes politics in books can be a little much for me. And for a book to get me this invested and interested, it was impressive. And to watch her try to do everything without anyone noticing, with no real power. This court did not want women to do anything but embroider and gossip. I was pretty enthralled, I have to say. I understood it all too. Sometimes some books, it gets very complicated and I don't necessarily understand all the machinations until the very end, and I'm like, oh, finally. But this one, it didn't make me feel dumb, which I appreciated. But I also got my taste of the pretty dresses and the fun stuff and the fairy tale aspects as well. And we always had the meddling stepmother to come in and remind me of fairy tale stuff. And we did see some other little fairy tale elements as well, which I really appreciated. I thought luster was a brilliant idea because it limited the magic system so carefully that it could not be abused, and it kept it very finite. And sometimes I find very soft magic systems, I get frustrated because all of a sudden so much can happen, or people develop these grand powers out of nowhere. It takes the story and it loses some of its integrity almost because it can make anything happen. In this, people were always limited. People always had to use their brains and their smarts and fight to a certain extent. And they never had that, like, oh, I can do anything kind of power, which I felt was true to the story of Cinderella to a certain extent. You had one fairy godmother come in at one point, and that was the only magic. In this, there was magic throughout, but it was very, very limited. And I loved that as well. I also have to say that when we did finally get to the romance, it was really, really good and heartbreaking and self-sacrificial, and it felt so much more real and authentic. The whole time I was reading this, I just kept thinking, it reminds me of Ever After. She is this smart Cinderella. She is this political Cinderella. She believes in so much. She fights for so much. When we get to the real love, it is real love. The writing was really good. It was a really good debut. However, the writing is also what is keeping me from fully giving this 5 stars. I can't explain what it is, but there was just a slight disconnect for me that kept me from fully getting that 5-star feeling, and I think it was the writing, because I cannot come up with a single plot point. I can't come up with a lack of character development. Maybe there were a few slow points actually in terms of pacing, maybe, but I think to slow it down a little bit in certain points just made the parts where it got very dramatic feel that much more intense. So I'm not sure that was a true fault. Some of the writing just felt a tiny bit cold or distanced. I don't know how to describe it. That was the only thing that kept me from the 5-star feels, I think. But I can't wait to see what this author does next. I loved this book. This absolutely won this particular battle between these two books. Despite my matching the other book, I had the purple dress, okay? And the jewelry. What do you want from me? I would love a dress in this color. Apparently it's just not on trend right now. So that is what I have to say for these 2 books. Cinderella beat Prince Charming. Oh, I love that. Cinderella's a better con woman than Prince Charming. She would be. That is it for me. I hope you enjoyed my video on the Battle of the Fairy Tales. I had so much fun shooting this one. I absolutely love fairy tales this time of year. I'm hoping to do maybe some winter fairy tales very soon, but we'll see. I love you all so much. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please let me know what your favorite fairy tale retellings are, irreverent or otherwise. I am in the mood. I want them all. So let me know down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will let you get back to your book. I have a ton to read for the Goodreads Choice Awards, which, oh my goodness, there are some ones that I'm really enjoying reading right now, so I can't wait to talk about those as well. I will see you next time, guys. Bye.